My mother laughed when my sister sneered. Look at her, 35, completely single, and still waiting for a miracle. They both smirked across the dinner table, expecting me to shrink away in shame like I always did. For years, I had been the family's scapegoat, the quiet one who absorbed their endless, cruel remarks about my love life. But this time, the laughter died instantly when I looked them dead in the eye, took a calm sip of my water, and said, "Actually, I've been happily married for 3 years, to the man who owns the firm you're both desperately trying to pitch your business to." The color vanished from their faces, and their jaws literally dropped. They thought they knew everything about my life, but they had no idea that their desperate need to humiliate me had just handed me the ultimate leverage to destroy their arrogant ambitions. My name is Chloe, and at 28 years old, I have finally learned the value of silence. For as long as I can remember, my existence in my own family was comparable to being a ghost, invisible unless someone needed a convenient footstool to make themselves feel taller. My mother, Eleanor, made it clear early on that my older sister, Vanessa, was the true masterpiece of her life. Vanessa was the golden child, loud, ambitious, and aggressively groomed for high society. I, on the other hand, was the quiet, introverted freelance graphic designer who preferred the company of sketchbooks over country club mixers. Growing up, my mother's affection was a currency I could never afford. Vanessa's minor accomplishments were celebrated with lavish parties, while my academic honors were met with a distracted nod and a reminder to fix my posture. The microaggressions were constant, woven seamlessly into daily conversations as backhanded compliments. "It's so wonderful you don't care about your appearance, Chloe. It saves you so much time," my mother would muse over breakfast. Vanessa would smirk, adding, "Some people just aren't built for the spotlight, Mom." This toxic dynamic taught me a vital survival mechanism: absolute privacy. I realized that any joy, dream, or piece of good news I shared with them would immediately be dissected, minimized, or used as ammunition. So, when my life actually began to change for the better, I chose to stay a ghost. I stopped volunteering information about my work, my friends, or my whereabouts. They assumed my silence meant I was living a bleak, empty existence, failing miserably at adulthood while Vanessa thrived. They completely mistook my peace for loneliness, never realizing that the wall of secrecy I built wasn't just to keep them out. It was to protect the incredible secret world I was building entirely on my own, far away from their suffocating shadow. That secret world belonged to Julian. I met him 3 years ago at a local art gallery opening where one of my digital designs was being featured. He wasn't the arrogant, flashy type of businessman my sister usually chased. Julian was grounded, brilliant, and possessed a quiet confidence that immediately made me feel safe. He ran a highly successful venture capital firm, but you would never know it from his humility. When he looked at me, he didn't see a disappointment or a ghost. He saw a woman worthy of deep love, respect, and undivided attention. Our relationship blossomed beautifully, away from the prying, critical eyes of my family. Within a year, we knew we wanted to spend the rest of our lives together. When Julian proposed, my first instinct wasn't joy, but a sudden, protective panic. I knew exactly what would happen if I introduced him to Eleanor and Vanessa. My mother would immediately try to manipulate him for financial favors, and Vanessa would find a way to undermine me, subtly whispering in his ear that he could do so much better than the family let down. They would poison the one pure thing I had ever possessed. So Julian and I made a deliberate choice. We married in a private, breathtaking courthouse ceremony with only 2 of our closest friends as witnesses. It wasn't a secret out of shame. It was an act of absolute sanctuary. Julian understood my family's toxic dynamics perfectly and supported my boundaries without a single shred of hesitation. For 3 wonderful years, we built a beautiful home, celebrated anniversaries, and shared a life of profound peace. Every evening, I returned to a husband who cherished me, while my family continued to believe I was coming home to an empty, sad apartment. Keeping my marriage a secret was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was the only way to ensure our happiness remained completely untainted by their endless desire to exploit and destroy. The trap was sprung during a mandatory Sunday dinner at my mother's house. Vanessa and Eleanor were practically vibrating with excitement, celebrating a massive upcoming opportunity for Vanessa's new luxury lifestyle brand. They had managed to secure a highly coveted pitch meeting with Vance Capital, a prestigious venture capital firm that could catapult Vanessa into high society. The champagne flowed, and the air was thick with their mutual self-congratulation. I sat quietly on the edge of the dining room, cutting my chicken and listening to them map out an empire built on arrogance. Predictably, their triumph required a victim to make it taste sweeter. They couldn't just celebrate Vanessa's success. They had to contrast it against my supposed failure. Eleanor paused mid-toast, her eyes landing on me with a look of manufactured pity. "It's such a shame you don't have Vanessa's drive, Chloe. A woman needs security." Vanessa laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that echoed off the walls. She swirled her wine glass, looking down her nose at me. "Look at her, 35, completely single, and still waiting for a miracle. The clock is ticking, Chloe, and honestly, nobody wants a woman who has nothing to offer but a few doodles." My mother didn't correct her. Instead, she let out a cruel, soft chuckle that authorized the humiliation. They both smirked across the table, expecting me to shrink away in shame, to bite my lip and blink back tears like I always did. They thought they were dealing with the same defenseless girl they had spent decades breaking down. They truly believed that my silence over the last 3 years was the silence of a desperate, lonely woman who was envious of their glamorous lives. They had absolutely no idea that their desperate need to humiliate me had just blindfolded them, and they were walking straight into a trap of their own making. I took a calm, deliberate sip of my water, letting the silence stretch until their smirks began to falter. The air in the dining room grew heavy as I set my glass down with a soft click. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the smug atmosphere like a blade, "I've been happily married for 3 years, to the man who owns the firm you're both desperately trying to pitch your business to." The laughter died instantly. The color completely vanished from Vanessa's face, and my mother's jaw literally dropped. For a few agonizing seconds, the only sound in the room was the hum of the refrigerator. Vanessa was the first to recover, her eyes narrowing into slits as she let out a forced, nervous laugh. "You're insane, Chloe. Is this some kind of pathetic coping mechanism? You don't even have a boyfriend, let alone a husband, and you certainly don't know anyone at Vance Capital." My mother nodded aggressively in agreement, her shock quickly morphing into deep indignation. "How dare you lie about something so serious just to diminish your sister's moment? It's embarrassing." I didn't argue. Instead, I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and unceremoniously laid it flat on the mahogany table. I swiped open my digital photo album, revealing a stunning, high-resolution picture from our private courthouse wedding. There I was, radiant in a simple white dress, standing hand-in-hand with Julian Vance, the unmistakable, heavily profiled CEO of Vance Capital. To drive the point entirely home, I slid my real marriage certificate, which I had kept in my bag after updating my legal records earlier that day, across the table. Vanessa lunged forward, grabbing the paper. As her eyes scanned the official state seal and Julian's unmistakable signature, her hands began to visibly shake. The undeniable truth dropped on them like a lead weight. The sister they had spent years dismissing as a lonely nobody was secretly the matriarch of the exact empire they needed to survive. The silence that followed was suffocating. Vanessa stared at the certificate, her lips parting as she tried to find words that wouldn't come. My mother looked from the paper to me, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and frantic calculation. The transition was instantaneous. The smug superiority they had carried for decades evaporated, replaced by a desperate, ugly panic. Eleanor cleared her throat, her face twisting into a tight, artificial smile as she leaned across the table. "Chloe, sweetheart, why didn't you tell us? Your own family. We would have thrown you the most beautiful wedding." "You would have ruined it, Mom," I said flatly, refusing to sugarcoat the truth. Vanessa slammed her hands on the table, her desperation bleeding through her anger. "You can't do this to me, Chloe. Do you know how much money I've sank into this lifestyle brand? If Vance Capital doesn't back me, I'm ruined. You have to talk to Julian. You have to tell him to approve my pitch." She was practically begging now, the golden child reduced to pleading with the ghost she had tried to crush just moments ago. I watched them scramble, entirely unmoved by their sudden display of familial affection. For years, they had used their words as weapons, never imagining a day would come where they would have to face the wreckage. "I don't have to do anything, Vanessa," I replied, standing up from the table and smoothing down my top. "Julian knows exactly how you treat me. I didn't even have to tell him. He has eyes." Eleanor reached out to grab my wrist, but I stepped back, letting them stew in the crushing realization of what they had done. Their lifelong habit of cruelty hadn't just hurt me, it had officially costing them the biggest financial opportunity of their lives. The morning of the pitch meeting, the atmosphere in the Vance Capital boardroom was cold and imposing. Vanessa arrived looking pale, her usual loud confidence replaced by a rigid, nervous energy. My mother sat beside her, clutching her designer purse like a shield. When the heavy mahogany doors opened, they both stood up quickly, ready to put on the performance of their lives for the CEO. But the moment Julian walked in, their smiles froze completely. Right behind him, carrying a professional tablet and dressed in a tailored blazer, was me. I took my seat directly, at the right hand of the boardroom table. Vanessa's pitch was a disaster from the start. She stumbled over her words, her eyes constantly darting over to me in sheer terror. She tried to project the image of a sophisticated business mogul, but Julian remained entirely unreadable, his eyes fixed on her presentation slides with a clinical indifference. When she finally finished her trembling conclusion, the silence in the room was deafening. Julian leaned back in his leather chair, interlacing his fingers. He didn't look at the screen. Instead, he looked directly into Vanessa's panicked eyes. "Your numbers are heavily inflated, and your market research is shallow," Julian said, his calm voice carrying an absolute weight that filled the entire room. "But more importantly, Vance Capital does not invest in brands. We invest in people. We look for leadership rooted in character, integrity, and basic human decency." My mother attempted to intervene, her voice cracking. "Mr. Vance, please, if you just give her a chance." Julian raised a single hand, instantly silencing her. "I know exactly how your family defines value, and I know how you treat people you think have nothing to offer. My wife is the smartest, most talented partner in this firm. If you cannot respect her, you have absolutely zero business dealing with me." He closed his folder with a final, decisive snap, looked over at me, and smiled softly. "The pitch is rejected. Have a good day, ladies." That boardroom door closing was the last time I ever saw my mother and sister. Today, Julian and I live in a beautiful home filled with genuine love, completely free from the suffocating toxicity that used to define my life. I finally have the peace I always deserved, and my graphic design business is thriving more than ever under my own terms. Now, I'm incredibly curious about all of you who have stayed to listen to my journey. What would you have done if you were standing in my shoes at that dinner table? Would you have kept the secret, or exposed the truth even sooner? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and please don't forget to mention the city you are watching from so I can see exactly how far my story has reached. Thank you so much for watching until the very end.